So how do we go from this to this? You're about to find out. What is up, guys? Welcome to the Paper Chase channel. Got a really interesting, really cool video for you today. I'm gonna share with you the books, the milestones rather, that led to what we know right now on shelves as the modern day comic book. Before we get into this, if you want to help support the channel in any way, the best way to do that is by commenting below, hitting the like button, or even sharing this video. Okay, so let's get into it.
In the beginning.
Published in 1934, we have the very first comic book ever to hit newsstands, and that is famous Funnies #1. These were basically like reprints from the comic strips that were being read in newspapers at the time, put into more of a magazine form. This book was actually really large, and then sold on newsstands for 10 cents. So if you are ever in a thrift store and see a famous Funnies #1 chilling, even a piece of it, even a cover of it, well, pick it up. This is where things start changing very quickly. #2, you've got New Fun Comics. Issue #1, New Fun Comics would eventually go on to be known as DC Comics. Very, very far down the line. But this little run of comics here is going to be responsible for so many of the monumental changes that shape the way comic books are known today. So not only is this technically the first DC comic, this would also be the first appearance of Walt Disney's Oswald the Rabbit, who later we all know basically gets scrapped and he comes up with a new character. I forgot his name. Marty Moose? Something like that. I don't know. This run is responsible for bringing originality into comics, not just reprints of old comic strips. This is where the real artistry started in the hobby. And that brings us to #3 on the list, New Fun Comics, issue #3. What is so cool about this book here is that this is the very first comic book that featured interior color art in history. How cool is that?
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
It's also the very first science fiction themed cover, which would go on to inspire a lot of great artists like Wally Wood during the pre-code horror era of comics. Huge monumental moment, and obviously a complete game changer. Now, #4 is pretty massive. This is New Fun Comics issue #6. This is the very first time that you see a superhero in comic books by the name of Dr. Occult. Not only that, but it's the very first artwork by Joe Shuster, and it's the very first written work by Jerry Siegel. These two guys would go on to create a little-known character, Superman. And more importantly, it's the first appearance of a vampire in comic books. That's why I like it. Moving on now to #5 on the list. This is where New Fun Comics actually switched the title to More Fun Comics. And More Fun Comics issue #9 is the very first standard size comic book that hit newsstands. Keep in mind, this is still relatively larger than our comic books that we're seeing today, but it is kind of when they started to do their size diminish as the years went by. And with #6 on the list, the next milestone hitting at More Fun Comics issue #16. Small but powerful. The very first time you see an issue number written on the front of a comic book. Pretty neat. Flash forward to 1947, and we have my probably biggest grail in comic book history. This is my personal grail.
That's the cup of a carpenter.
I don't know if I'm ever going to find one or get one, but if I did, it would be pretty amazing. This is Eerie #1, the very first horror comic book. Enough said. You had science fiction stories and things like that, in the early stages of comics, but once you implement horror into the grand scheme of things, you're really changing the game. You're kind of saying it's okay to start doing a lot of things. And this is kind of where the start of the horror storytelling in comics started, which eventually led to pre-code horror books and the Comics Code Authority and things like that. So you could all say it started here. And I can't wait to find one day. Keep checking those back issue bins, I guess. Number 8 on the list is so amazing, and I really think it is kind of underrated. I don't hear too many people talk about this. This is Impact number 1. It was meant to be released before the Comics Code Authority, but due to some publishing conflicts, it actually wasn't able to get released until after the Comics Code Authority. But it's the story that's in this that is so monumental. It is a story called Master Race. This is a very short comic story about an ex-Nazi, but this is so amazing. So as he's sitting on the train, he sees a man and the man recognizes him. So we're led to believe that the gentleman that recognizes the main character we're following is a previous World War II Holocaust survivor, and maybe they were somehow on the same concentration camp, or we're kind of left up to our own interpretation of, is he suffering from an extreme guilt or a mental illness after the war? It's the way the artist, Bernard Krigstein, illustrated the next few pages. Up until this point, comic strips were very blocky, very straightforward, not too creative as far as angles go, but because of the deferred release of this issue, Bernard Krigstein was actually able to put more time into writing this story, and it allowed him to tell it in a more picturesque form. So he started extending the panels. The way these panels were illustrated, showing the movement and dramatizing the intensity of what the actions are without words, is completely iconic, was never done before. Now it's pretty standard that a lot of comic book artists will tell a story with images, but these few pages right here was the very first time that this was ever done, and it's done extremely well, and it's pretty amazing. All right, number 9 on the list is, I think, one that a lot of people know. This is Green Lantern number 76. This is basically what some people know as the death of the Silver Age, or rather the birth of the Bronze Age. The biggest difference between the Silver Age and the Bronze Age was not only the evolution of art, but the evolution of storytelling. The weight, the heaviness of this issue, the subject matter, was never really talked about before in comics. And this is kind of the thing that set forth, hey, we're going to start talking about some more real life matters, some heavier topics, and this is the birth of that. Alright, so now comic books are kind of being released in ways that we kind of recognize them. The stories are kind of more real life. We're definitely making our way towards the modern comic book. The next one, not really talked about ever at all, but this is Shatter Special issue number 1. This is the very first comic book that was illustrated entirely on a computer, on a Mac.
Press the Apple thing.
In our time, it might seem like, oh yeah, I guess, that would be expected, but in 200 years from now, when you look back at an issue like that, if there's any left, it's pretty monumental. This was published in 1984. And the last one on the list, for all you variant lovers out there, hey, I like me a variant every now and then myself. Man of Steel number 1, this was issued in 1986. This is the very first comic art that intentionally had a separate variant meant to increase the sales of the comic. This is not a second print. This is not a reprint or a facsimile. This is a strict art cover variant. Very first one done in 1986. Both the artwork was done by John Byrne. One went to newsstands and the other one went to the comic shops. Pretty wild, pretty monumental. Can you imagine being alive during some of those moments when, there's an Eerie number 1 sitting on the shelf in your local drugstore, or flipping through pages of an Impact 1, seeing your standard square comic book layout and getting your mind blown in the next page by all these intricate panels and crazy ways of visual storytelling. I mean, it must have been really cool. And to kind of close this off, I know the whole AI art, this wasn't supposed to be part of this video. I know the whole AI art thing is definitely part of our evolution that we're alive for to witness. And, there really is no stopping it. I think the most important thing, Brian McClay said on a podcast, I think he put it pretty well. It's a freight train that's coming. The best thing that we can do is figure out how to keep it on the tracks. And I think that's a great way to put it. Or how can artists use this as an advantage without being completely extinct? So I hope you guys enjoyed this journey through history on what made the modern comic, and maybe you found as much interest in this stuff as I do. Leave a comment down below of any other milestone comic books that you guys can think of that also changed comics. I'd love to do more videos like this. This is a lot of fun. This is part of what I love when it comes to comics. I would love to snag any of these books. Well, maybe not the Man of Steel. Actually, I think I probably have one of those. But if you got Eerie #1 or an Impact #1 you're trying to sell, let me know. Hit the like button on your way out, guys. Until next time, this is Paper Chase Comics saying, how do you like the hobby?